We need to be wary of the speed with which a democratic country can drift very quickly if we don't guard democracy. Is parliamentary politics in this country broken? Does anyone think it is, by the way? Oh yeah, quite a lot of you. Were you the people who took part in the UCL survey? They did a massive piece of polling, the Constitution Unit there, which found that most people think democracy is not always broken, but certainly harmed, not working well and wanted, and had lots of great suggestions for improvements, which is great because so do I, and so do many think tanks. And a year ago, I was speaking about truth and lies in politics. Now, I think it's quite interesting to note that we're right in the middle of the Parliamentary Privileges Committee's process. There was a lot of alliteration in that sentence, for which I don't apologise. But we're in that process because somebody is alleged to have misled Parliament. And I think it's really important that we notice that a process has kicked in. There is a process going on. The Privileges Committee, I may fairly say, have kept stum, which is quite right. They've virtually got into conclave. Every time I walk past Harriet Harman, who's the chair, I kind of look at her eyebrows to see if they know they're going up, are they going down, what's happening? Nothing. Eyebrows absolutely stationary. But because the new evidence came out this week, I find it hard not to laugh about this, because we're paying for his brief. We're paying for his lawyers, but because we're paying for them, they felt obliged to disclose new evidence which they found of his possible law-breaking, alleged law-breaking, which is the right and proper thing to do. So it's one of Parliament's rich ironies. I have complained so many times in my Shadow Leader of the House role about why are we paying for this at legal advice? Well, it's because we're paying that there is now more evidence about the parties in Chequers, or alleged parties in Chequers. Now, high-profile scandals like these, in my view, are a plague on certainly both our houses in Parliament, but all our houses politically, because people don't, in my view, just think, oh, that's just that MP. They tend to then think that's the whole lot of them. As with the expenses scandal, so too with the sexual harassment scandal, which we're also in the middle of. And people, in my view, and understandably, tend to blame us as a body politic rather than saying, well, it was just that person or just that party. And that's a problem, because when people lose faith in democracy, they lose faith in voting, they lose faith in challenging, they lose faith in holding us to account. That weakens the voter base, it weakens accountability, and we lead gradually then down a path that we really do not want to go down. And if you want to know more about that, I can highly recommend Gideon Rachman, Financial Times journalist, his book on various autocrats, many of whom, by the way, got elected democratically, and then pulled the democratic ladder up behind them, or tried to. So, you know, we don't have to look too far. There's an election today. So we need to be wary of the speed with which a democratic country can drift very quickly if we don't guard democracy, even if we want to argue about it, even if we want to say, look, it's broken, but it's mendable. Now, as we get closer to a general election, you will see some of my colleagues setting out their detailed policy briefs, and you're probably not going to see mine, because reforming statutory instrument procedures is not a sexy thing to put in a manifesto. Though to those of us that do it, it really matters. I really think that we need to take a cold, hard look at how we legislate. That includes how we regulate. And there's lots of ways we could do it better. Various think tanks who are as nerdy, no, they are way nerdier than me, have come up with some really good technical reasons. So I just pay a bit of tribute here, partly in case any of them are here, but also because they do amazing work if you want the detail of what I'm giving you politician top line to. Institute for Government, Constitution Unit, fabulous Meg Russell, and the Hansard Society. They do really great work. I do not agree with them on everything, far from it. In fact, sometimes I look at them and I think, you're writing what an academic would write without thinking about politics, and politics does matter. But they come up with some really great things, many of which I'm going to be at least putting to my colleagues in the Shadow Cabinet as things I think we should do. Now, bear in mind that we have had, I've shadowed now 3 potential sword carriers. Only one of them actually got to do it. I bet Jacob Rees-Mogg was feeling pretty sick when he realised that he missed out. He was my first. But let's go back in time. If you were here last year, sorry, I'm just going to mention it again. Owen Paterson. Anyone remember that scandal? It's important that we hang on to that memory, because that needs dealing with, and it's left a legacy with voters, which in my view has damaged us, that if you are an MP who has been found fairly and squarely, with evidence thoroughly sifted, according to the rules at the time, to have broken those rules and taken what looks to me, at least, like a large amount of money for a large amount of ministerial access, if you are found to have done that, and the government's response, as was Jacob's, is to stand up and say, here's a motion saying that he should be expelled, but I don't agree with it, and I'll now tell you about why I don't agree with the motion that I'm supposed to have proposed, which was an extraordinary moment. I was opposite him, thinking, I don't even know how I'm going to respond to this, because you've literally just undermined your own motion, which should have been straightforward, up and down. He's banged to rights, according to the Standards and Privileges Committee, according to the Standards Commissioner, who is an independent person with great skill, and you're now saying you want to change the rules retrospectively. Now, that has damaged us. It has damaged the body politic. It has damaged people's views of politicians, which is they can just get away with what they want, because if they don't like the rules, they'll just make another set. I don't think that's true of most MPs, by the way. And I certainly witnessed many Tory MPs on that day, in that vote, deeply unhappy. Some of them voted with us, others abstained, others did vote with the government with gritted teeth. Others with joy in their hearts, I've got to say. But I think that is something we need to notice, and I want due respect for Conservative MPs who were not at all happy. But whether it's the Patterson scandal, or it's the unlawful closing of Parliament, or Boris Johnson, I mean, when we get to the end of the Privileges Committee, we will know whether he was knowingly misleading Parliament. I was in PMQs those 3 times when he said 3 different things to roughly the same question, so it'll be interesting to see how they work through that. Or those those former Tory ministers who we all saw, if you follow Led by Donkeys, were accused of plotting to line their own pockets by up to £10,000 a day for a fake Korean company. Now, that matters to me, because I think we should have no paid lobbying. I just think MPs are MPs. We should not be paid lobbyists. Shouldn't. We should not be paid lobbyists. When I knock on doors in Bristol West, soon to be called Bristol Central, I don't want people saying to me, well, who do you work for? Do you work for me, or do you work for that fella that you're taking £10,000 a day from? It's really important that we're clean about that. And as I said, the Constitution Unit, who's recently surveyed this, and probably surveyed some of you, found 52% of people either distrusted or strongly distrusted Parliament, which makes me gulp for breath a bit. I do think that's a problem, because you get to vote for us and you get to vote us out, but that survey has really obsessed me and informed my thinking. The public also said in that survey that they wanted stronger mechanisms to uphold integrity, including a more powerful independent regulator, and I agree. We've just seen in the last week that there's a problem when it's up to the Prime Minister to decide whether or not one of his ministers is referred to his ethics advisor, and then takes a few days over it and then decides not to. Now, I think that's a problem, and we would like to see in the Labour Party, we'd like to see that person or body, and we think we actually want to replace quite a few of these with one single independent ethics and integrity commission, that they should be able to initiate. Yes, thank you. I think so too. They should be able to initiate an inquiry, not have to wait until the Prime Minister. I mean, I think it's actually damaged Boris Johnson, to be honest, his own reputation, because it rested on him to decide whether or not he referred himself. And that is also, that was problematic, wasn't it? It should have been an independent process. We had the illegal closing down of Parliament. We've also had things that are really tacky, but I'm going to mention them anyway because they're my own hobby horses. So we have had ministers who very publicly have not turned up to select committee hearings. Now, select committees are not like all party parliamentary groups. All party groups are where we pick an issue and we do some work on it. They've got to be cross-party, but they have no force. A select committee is a committee, cross-party. By statute, it has the power to compel witnesses, including ministers. So when ministers fail to turn up to be scrutinised by the select committee, whose literal job it is to scrutinise them, that is a problem. And to turn up after 3 or 4 times of being asked is not, in my view, okay. When urgent questions are granted, the right minister needs to turn up. As legislation rolls through Parliament, we don't just need the explanatory notes, which actually, to be fair to the government, do appear. We need the impact assessments in good time. And if we don't have them, our debate about them is necessarily poorer. So for me, that means that I look at that current setup where ministers are also failing to answer parliamentary questions in time. Again, not all. There are some notable exceptions. But it's not okay that Penny repeatedly says, yes, I will take that up for the honourable gentleman and I will make sure he or she has a response. Whichever side it's on, and I've got to say, I'd be really cross-party about this. There are Tory MPs as well as Labour MPs and MPs from other parties really unhappy with certain government departments that do not answer our questions. And why does that matter to you? Because they're your questions. They're the questions we ask on your behalf. They're the questions we ask because you've told us that something matters. If we don't get answers, it's not just a boring parliamentary techie thing, it's a problem for you, for democracy, for politics. We've then got a hefty pile of bills getting stuck in the Lords, and my colleagues in the Lords are, they're working flat out. They're sitting to way beyond midnight. I can tell you right now, we're not. And that's a problem as well, because it means that somewhere along the line we're leaving the detail to our colleagues in the Lords. That's a very bad sign indeed. We're the elected representatives. Some of you may be people who say, well, we should have a fully elected second chamber. I think we could argue that one out, and certainly the Gordon Brown Commission, which Keir Starmer commissioned for us on behalf of the Labour Party, is suggesting that we do that. Opinions vary on how effective that would be and how you'd sort out primacy. But I certainly know that while we've got a House of Commons that's the democratically elected body politic where your representatives sit, we should be doing more scrutiny, not less. We shouldn't be leaving it all up to the Lords. There should not be new amendments appearing to bills in the Lords, which my colleague in this room, I won't point at her to make her feel self-conscious, but she's nodding at me, so I know I'm right. And it's not okay. This is not okay. Right, so I've already mentioned, we want an independent ethics and integrity commission. There's an alphabet soup at the moment around between the various different bodies to scrutinise us as MPs, us as ministers, and public figures in general. And I think the public needs to be able to see really concretely that it is done independently, that they, the commissioners, or commissioner, in the case of the Standards Commissioner, can initiate inquiries, can take things up. And that would matter, because I think then you wouldn't get, hopefully in time, that feeling of despair that I hear from so many constituents, and certainly the Constitution Unit's work bears this out, that feeling of despair that nothing happens, nothing changes. We have a problem with sexual harassment at the moment, and this is one of those things that, as shadow leader of the House, I get to influence now. Unlike my colleagues, I don't have to wait quite so long to actually make some concrete change. But we're going to have a big argument about it when it comes to the Commons on the 12th of June, because not everyone's going to like what we've come up with. Penny and I have worked on this. I'm yet to discover whether she loves it, what we're doing or not, but she will propose the motion. I will effectively second it because it's a piece of work done cross-party by the House of Commons Commission. It may surprise some of you to know that we don't have a mechanism for removing someone temporarily from the House of Commons if they are accused of serious sexual violence, rape or assault. Now, that happens in every other big organisation. You would get gardening leave or something based on risk, and that's important. It wouldn't be for everything. We are calling this a risk-based exclusion policy, and it's a temporary policy, it's a temporary procedure, but it is a big deal to get MPs to vote, to delegate responsibility to another body that isn't all MPs, to decide who can sit in our House effectively.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.